The training facility fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. 22 recruits stood in formation, their eyes fixed on the woman who had just walked into their world. At 5'6", she didn't look like what they expected. No bulging muscles, no intimidating scars, just calm confidence that seemed to fill the entire room. One recruit whispered to another, "That's our new instructor?" What happened next would become legendary in military training circles. In less than 60 seconds, everything these young men thought they knew about strength, skill, and respect would be shattered. The woman standing before them wasn't just any instructor. She was someone who had survived the impossible, fought in battles they could only imagine, and earned her place among the most elite warriors in the world. This is the story of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, a Navy SEAL whose reputation preceded her like thunder before lightning. But on this particular day, she would have to prove herself all over again to a group of recruits who had no idea they were about to learn the most important lesson of their military careers. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen had seen this look before. The mixture of surprise, doubt, and barely hidden amusement that crossed the faces of new recruits when they first laid eyes on her. At 34, she had spent the last 12 years proving herself in a world where women were still fighting for acceptance. Today would be no different. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Coronado Naval Base training grounds as Sarah made her way to Building 147. Her dress blue uniform was perfectly pressed, every medal and ribbon exactly where it should be. The Navy Cross gleamed on her chest, a decoration earned in the mountains of Afghanistan where she had single-handedly held off enemy forces for 6 hours while her team evacuated wounded civilians. Master Chief Rodriguez, her longtime friend and colleague, fell into step beside her. "You sure you want to take this assignment, Chen? These recruits have been through 3 instructors already. Command thinks they're getting too comfortable, too cocky." Sarah smiled slightly, adjusting the small backpack on her shoulder. Maybe they just needed the right kind of wake-up call. The training facility buzzed with the nervous energy that always accompanied the arrival of a new instructor. 22 recruits from various military branches had been selected for this elite special operations preparatory course. They were the best of the best from their respective units, each one believing they had what it took to join the most exclusive military organizations in the world. Recruit Johnson, a former Army Ranger, stood near the back of the formation. At 6'4" and built like a linebacker, he had dominated every physical challenge thrown at him. "I heard our new instructor is some Navy pencil pusher," he muttered to the man next to him. "Probably never even seen combat." Recruit Martinez, a Marine Force Recon veteran, shook his head. "Command wouldn't put someone soft in charge of us, but I heard it's a woman. Never had a female instructor before." The whispers stopped abruptly as the door opened. Sarah entered the room with the measured pace of someone who owned every space she walked into. Behind her, Master Chief Rodriguez carried a large metal case, his expression unreadable. "Attention!" Rodriguez called out, and the recruits snapped to position. Sarah walked slowly along the front of the formation, making eye contact with each recruit. She could read them like an open book. The skepticism, the curiosity, the challenge in their eyes. Some tried to hide their doubt better than others, but it was all there. "At ease," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly across the room without needing to be raised. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Chen. For the next 6 weeks, I will be your primary instructor for advanced combat techniques, tactical leadership, and survival training." Johnson shifted slightly, unable to keep the smirk completely off his face. Sarah noticed immediately but continued without acknowledging it. "I know what you're thinking," she said, beginning to pace slowly in front of them. "Some of you are wondering what qualifies me to train the future special operations forces of this country. Others are already planning how you'll test my limits, push my boundaries, see what I'm really made of." The room was dead silent now, every recruit hanging on her words. "Before we begin, I want to share something with you. I've been where you want to go. I've done things that will remain classified long after we're all gone. I've carried wounded teammates through enemy territory, made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for innocent civilians, and yes, I've killed enemy combatants who threatened American lives." She stopped pacing and faced them directly. "But none of that matters right now. What matters is whether you have the discipline, intelligence, and mental fortitude to earn your place among the elite. Physical strength is just the beginning. What I'm going to teach you goes far beyond anything you've learned before." Master Chief Rodriguez opened the metal case he had been carrying, revealing an array of training weapons, tactical gear, and simulation equipment. Sarah picked up a training pistol, checking it with practiced efficiency. This course has a 70% failure rate, she continued. Not because the physical demands are beyond your capabilities, but because most people can't handle the mental pressure, the constant evaluation, the need to think 3 steps ahead while your body is pushed to its limits. Recruit Thompson, a Navy corpsman with aspirations for SEAL training, raised his hand slightly. Ma'am, what's the most important thing we need to learn here? Sarah studied him for a moment before answering. Respect. Not just for your superiors or your mission, but for every person on your team, regardless of their gender, background, or appearance. The moment you let assumptions cloud your judgment is the moment you become a liability in the field. She could see Johnson rolling his eyes slightly, trying to be subtle about it. Several other recruits noticed too, creating a small ripple of tension in the formation. However, Sarah continued, her tone shifting slightly, I understand that respect is something that has to be earned. Some of you are looking at me right now and wondering if I've really earned mine. The silence in the room became heavy, loaded with unspoken challenge. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a chance to find out. One volunteer will have the opportunity to test my qualifications. Full combat simulation, non-lethal training weapons, realistic scenario. If you can complete the objective while I'm trying to stop you, I'll recommend you for immediate advancement to the next level of training. Every recruit in the room straightened slightly. This was unprecedented. Instructors didn't put themselves in direct competition with trainees. But, Sarah added, holding up one finger, if you fail, you'll spend the rest of the course learning why Special Operations Forces are special. No questions asked, no complaints. Complete dedication to every exercise I design. Johnson's hand shot up immediately. I volunteer, ma'am. Sarah had expected this. Johnson was exactly the type who would see this as an opportunity to prove that his size and strength trumped any technique or experience she might have. Very well, Recruit Johnson. Master Chief Rodriguez will explain the scenario while I prepare the equipment. Rodriguez stepped forward, his weathered face showing no emotion. Simple hostage rescue simulation. One civilian dummy located in the mock structure behind this building. Recruit Johnson's objective is to reach the target and extract it to the designated safe zone. Lieutenant Commander Chen's job is to prevent the extraction using any means necessary. The recruits began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't just training. This was a direct challenge to their instructor's authority and competence. Both participants will be equipped with simulation weapons that fire paint rounds. Contact sensors will register hits. Any hit to center mass or head results in immediate incapacitation. The exercise begins in 15 minutes. As the recruits filed out to observe from the designated area, Johnson approached Sarah with swagger in his step. Ma'am, I just want you to know I'm going to give this everything I've got. Nothing personal. Sarah looked up at him calmly. I wouldn't expect anything less, Recruit. And Johnson? Yes, ma'am? Neither will I. The next 15 minutes passed quickly as both participants geared up. Johnson selected the heaviest tactical vest available, loaded himself with extra ammunition, and chose the most powerful training rifle in the arsenal. His strategy was clear: overwhelming firepower and direct assault. Sarah's preparation was notably different. She selected lighter gear, a basic sidearm, and spent most of her time studying the layout of the training structure. While Johnson talked strategy with his fellow recruits, Sarah sat quietly, visualizing multiple scenarios and contingencies. Master Chief Rodriguez called both participants to the starting line. The training structure was a 2-story building designed to simulate urban combat environments. Multiple entry points, various obstacles, and enough complexity to challenge even experienced operators. Recruit Johnson, you will begin at the south entrance. Lieutenant Commander Chen, you start from the north side. The civilian dummy is located on the second floor, center room. Johnson, your extraction point is the western exit. Chen, your job is to stop him. Any questions? Both shook their heads. Exercise begins in 3, 2, 1. Execute. Johnson immediately sprinted toward the south entrance, his boots pounding against the concrete. His plan was simple: speed and aggression. Get to the target before his instructor could set up any meaningful defense. Sarah moved differently. Instead of running toward the building, she circled wide to the east, using available cover and taking her time to observe Johnson's approach. She could hear his heavy footsteps echoing through the structure as he made his way to the stairwell. The recruits watched from behind protective barriers, their attention split between Johnson's obvious progress and their instructor's seemingly passive approach. Several began to whisper that maybe Johnson had the right idea after all. Johnson reached the second floor and located the target room within 2 minutes. His confidence soared as he grabbed the civilian dummy and began to make his way toward the extraction point. Everything was going according to plan. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Johnson cursed under his breath, suddenly realizing that his instructor had somehow gained access to the building's electrical system. Cutting power isn't part of the exercise parameters, he called out, hoping Rodriguez would intervene. But Master Chief Rodriguez said nothing. He knew that in real special operations there were no parameters, no fair play, only mission success or failure. Johnson adjusted his night vision equipment and continued toward the extraction point, the dummy slung over his shoulder. He moved more carefully now, his rifle sweeping each corner as he advanced. The first paint round hit the wall inches from his head. Johnson spun toward the source of fire but saw nothing. The red emergency lights created deep shadows and distorted his depth perception. He fired 3 quick rounds in the general direction of the shot, but hit nothing but air. Another paint round, this one from a completely different direction, splattered against the wall behind him. Then another from his left side. Johnson realized with growing unease that his instructor was moving position after every shot, using the building's layout to her advantage. He picked up his pace, desperate to reach the extraction point before he could be flanked. The dummy was heavier than he had expected, throwing off his balance and making it difficult to move quietly. The third paint round hit his vest, just outside the center mass zone. A near miss that would have been a serious wound in real combat. "Come on!" Johnson shouted in frustration. "Fight me face to face." Silence was his only answer. Johnson reached the stairwell leading down to the western exit. He could see the extraction point through the windows. Just one more flight of stairs, and he would have completed the objective. That's when Sarah appeared. She emerged from the shadows at the bottom of the stairs like a ghost materializing from the darkness. No dramatic entrance, no threatening posture. She simply stood there, blocking his path, her training pistol held in a relaxed but ready position. "Going somewhere, recruit?" she asked quietly. Johnson raised his rifle, confident that his superior firepower and size would end this quickly. But as he pulled the trigger, Sarah was already moving. What happened next would be replayed and analyzed by every recruit for weeks to come. Sarah didn't just dodge Johnson's shots. She seemed to anticipate them. She moved with economy and precision, never wasting motion, never giving him a clear target. Johnson fired rapidly, trying to overwhelm her with volume of fire, but each shot missed by inches, as Sarah flowed around his line of sight like water finding the path of least resistance. In less than 10 seconds, Johnson's rifle clicked empty. As he reached for a fresh magazine, Sarah struck, but instead of shooting, she closed the distance between them with 3 quick steps and executed a textbook disarm that sent his rifle clattering down the stairs. Johnson, still carrying the civilian dummy, tried to draw his sidearm. Sarah was faster. The paint round hit him square in the center of his chest. Exercise terminated. Master Chief Rodriguez called over the intercom. "Recruit Johnson is down. Mission failed." The silence that followed was deafening. 21 recruits stared in stunned disbelief as their largest, strongest, most confident teammate stood motionless with a bright orange paint splatter across his vest. Sarah holstered her weapon and looked up at Johnson. "The dummy represents an innocent civilian, recruit. In your eagerness to complete the mission, you expose them to enemy fire multiple times. In real combat, that civilian would be dead." Johnson's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment, anger, or exertion was hard to tell. "You cheated. You cut the power." "I used available resources to complete my mission," Sarah replied calmly. "In special operations, adaptability isn't cheating, it's survival. Your enemy will use every advantage they can find. Your job is to be better prepared than they are." She picked up the civilian dummy and cradled it carefully in her arms. "This represents someone's mother, father, son, or daughter. Someone who trusted us to bring them home safely. Every decision you make, every risk you take, every shot you fire has to account for their safety. Physical strength and firepower mean nothing if you don't have the wisdom to use them properly." Master Chief Rodriguez joined them at the bottom of the stairs. Recruits fall in for debrief. As the group reassembled in the main training area, Sarah could see that the dynamic had shifted completely. The skeptical looks were gone, replaced by something much more valuable, genuine respect and attention. "What you witnessed today wasn't about me proving my qualifications to you," Sarah began, addressing the entire group. "It was about demonstrating that effective special operations work requires more than physical capabilities. It requires tactical thinking, adaptability, patience, and above all, respect for the mission and the people you're trying to protect." She gestured toward Johnson. who was still processing his defeat. Recruit Johnson showed excellent physical conditioning, proper weapon handling, and determination. Those are all essential qualities. But he also made assumptions about his opponent, relied too heavily on superior firepower, and lost sight of his primary objective when faced with unexpected challenges. Johnson straightened slightly, realizing that his instructor was offering constructive criticism rather than humiliation. In 6 weeks, you're going to face scenarios that will test every aspect of your character and capabilities. Some of you will discover that you have what it takes to join the special operations community. Others will realize that their talents are better suited to other forms of service. Both outcomes are valuable and honorable. Sarah moved to stand directly in front of the formation. But understand this. Success in this program isn't determined by how much you can lift, how fast you can run, or how many targets you can hit. It's determined by how well you can think under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, work as part of a team, and maintain your moral compass when everything around you is chaos. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set over the base, casting long shadows across the training ground. Sarah could see that her message was beginning to sink in. Tomorrow we begin with basic tactical movement and communication protocols. Tonight, I want you to think about what you saw here today. Think about your own assumptions, your own limitations, and what you're really hoping to achieve in this program. She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. Dismiss, but Recruit Johnson, please remain behind. As the other recruits filed out, talking quietly among themselves, Johnson approached his instructor with significantly less swagger than he had shown earlier in the day. Ma'am, I want to apologize for my attitude earlier. I was out of line. Sarah studied him for a moment. What are you apologizing for, specifically? Johnson thought carefully before answering. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your appearance. I let my ego override my judgment, and during the exercise, I prioritized my own success over the safety of the civilian I was supposed to protect. Good, Sarah nodded. Those are exactly the right lessons to take from today. But I don't want an apology, Recruit Johnson. I want you to use this experience to become better at your job. She picked up her gear bag and slung it over her shoulder. You have all the physical tools you need to succeed in special operations. What you need to develop now is the mental discipline to use those tools wisely. Can you do that? Johnson straightened to attention. Yes, Mom, I can. Then, I'll see you at 0500 tomorrow for the real training. As Sarah walked away, Johnson remained at attention until she was out of sight. For the first time since arriving at the course, he understood that he had everything to learn and nothing to prove. The alarm sounded at 0430 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness of the barracks like a blade. 22 recruits rolled out of their bunks, muscle memory from years of military service taking over, even as their minds struggled to catch up. The previous day's demonstration had left them all with a new understanding of what they were facing. Johnson was already dressed and ready, having spent most of the night replaying his humbling encounter with Lieutenant Commander Chen. The image of her appearing in the stairwell like a phantom was burned into his memory, along with the lesson it represented. He had underestimated his opponent completely, and it had cost him everything. Recruit Martinez laced up his boots in the next bunk over. You okay, man? You've been quiet since yesterday. Johnson nodded slowly, just thinking about what the LT said, about assumptions and priorities. He stood and checked his gear one more time. I've been in combat before, but I've never had to think about it the way she described it. The recruits assembled in the pre-dawn darkness outside their barracks. Breath visible in the cool morning air, Master Chief Rodriguez appeared exactly at 0500, his silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light from the street lamps. Morning, ladies, Rodriguez called out in his gravelly voice. Lieutenant Commander Chen is waiting for you at the obstacle course. You have 15 minutes to get there. Anyone who arrives late gets to explain to her personally why punctuality isn't important in special operations. The group moved out at a steady pace, not quite running but faster than a casual walk. Nobody wanted to be the one explaining tardiness to their instructor after yesterday's demonstration. Sarah was waiting for them at the obstacle course, but this wasn't the standard military training setup they were familiar with. She had spent the early morning hours reconfiguring the obstacles, adding new elements and creating scenarios they had never seen before. Good morning, she said as the recruits formed up in front of her. Today we begin your real education. Everything you've learnt about physical training, tactical movement, and team coordination is about to be challenged. She gestured toward the modified obstacle course behind her. This isn't about individual performance anymore. Every exercise from now on will be evaluated on team success, not personal achievement. You will succeed or fail together. Recruit Thompson raised his hand slightly. Ma'am, how do we account for different physical capabilities? Some of us are naturally faster or stronger than others. Sarah smiled slightly. Excellent question. And that's exactly the point. In real special operations, you don't get to choose your teammates based on their physical specifications. You get assigned a mission with the people available, and you find a way to succeed regardless of individual limitations. She walked over to a complex obstacle that hadn't been there the day before. It was a wall roughly 12 feet high with no handholds positioned over a water pit. Beyond it was a rope bridge missing several planks, followed by a tunnel system that branched in multiple directions. This exercise is called Leave No One Behind, Sarah explained. Your mission is simple. Everyone must complete the entire course within 30 minutes. If any single person fails to finish, the entire team fails. Quote. The recruits exchanged glances. Some of them were clearly more concerned than others about the time limit and team requirement. But here's the twist, Sarah continued. 3 of you will be designated as wounded and cannot complete the obstacles under their own power. The team must find a way to get everyone through while managing these casualties. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped forward with a clipboard. Martinez, Johnson, and Chen, you are the designated wounded. You can move and assist with planning, but you cannot climb, jump, or bear your own weight on obstacles. Johnson felt a surge of irony at being designated as wounded on his first real training day, but he pushed the emotion aside. This was exactly the kind of challenge his instructor had been talking about. Sarah took a position where she could observe the entire course. You have 5 minutes to plan before you begin. Use them wisely. The recruits huddled together, immediately beginning to analyze the obstacles and discuss strategy. Johnson found himself naturally taking charge, his previous day's humility translating into a more thoughtful approach to leadership. Okay, let's break this down systematically, Johnson said quietly. We've got 20 people total, with 3 of us unable to perform under our own power. The first obstacle requires getting everyone over a 12-foot wall. Recruit Stevens, a former Air Force pararescue specialist, studied the wall carefully. We'll need human ladders for the wall. The strongest climbers go up first, then help pull others up. What about the wounded? Asked Recruit Park, a former Navy corpsman. Johnson looked at the setup thoughtfully. We'll need to rig some kind of hauling system. Rope, human chains, something to get us up without us having to climb. Thompson pointed toward the rope bridge. That's going to be the real challenge. If we can't bear our own weight, how do we cross a bridge missing half its planks? Martinez, one of the other designated wounded, spoke up. Maybe the wounded don't cross the bridge the same way as everyone else. Maybe we go under it or around it or get carried across. The planning time flew by faster than expected. When Sarah called time, the recruits had the bare bones of a strategy but hadn't had time to work through all the details. Execute, she called out. The team moved toward the first obstacle with purpose, but it immediately became apparent that planning and execution were 2 very different things. The wall proved more challenging than expected when they had to account for getting 3 people up who couldn't climb. Stevens and 2 other strong climbers scaled the wall quickly and dropped ropes down to the rest of the team. But hauling the wounded recruits up while maintaining safety proved awkward and time-consuming. Come on, we're already behind schedule, someone called out from the top of the wall. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, Johnson reminded them, repeating a mantra he had learned in ranger training. Better to do it right than do it over. Getting everyone over the wall took 12 minutes, leaving them with 18 minutes for the rest of the course. The rope bridge posed an even greater challenge. The bridge swayed dangerously with each person who crossed, and the missing planks meant that crossing required careful coordination and timing. With 3 people unable to support their own weight, the team had to get creative. Thompson came up with a solution that surprised everyone. What if the wounded don't cross the bridge at all? What if we lower them down to the water, they swim across, and we pull them up on the other side? It was risky, unconventional, and exactly the kind of adaptive thinking Sarah was hoping to see. The plan worked, but it cost them precious time. With only 8 minutes remaining, they still had to navigate the tunnel system, which proved to be the most complex challenge yet. The tunnels branched in multiple directions, some leading to dead ends, others looping back on themselves. The team had to split up to explore different routes while maintaining communication and ensuring the wounded members could still be assisted through the narrow passages. Johnson found himself crawling through a tunnel barely wide enough for his shoulders, calling back information to the team about which passages were viable. The role reversal wasn't lost on him. Yesterday, he had been the strong, aggressive point man. Today, he was dependent on his teammates for success. With 2 minutes left on the clock, the last recruit emerged from the tunnel system. The team had completed the course, but barely, and everyone was exhausted. Sarah gathered them in a circle for immediate debrief while the experience was still fresh in their minds. "What did you learn?" she asked simply. Stephen spoke first. "Planning is essential, but you have to be ready to adapt when reality doesn't match your plan." "Good. What else?" Thompson added. "Individual strengths matter, but team coordination matters more. I'm a strong swimmer, but that didn't help until we figured out how to use it as part of a team strategy." Johnson raised his hand. "Being designated as wounded changed my entire perspective on the exercise. I had to trust my teammates completely and contribute in ways I'm not used to." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Excellent observations. Now, here's what I saw that you might have missed." She walked them back through the course, pointing out moments where communication had broken down, where individual ego had interfered with team success, and where creative problem-solving had saved the day. "The most important thing I observed was that you started to function as a team rather than a collection of individuals. That's the foundation of everything else you'll learn here." She paused to let that sink in before continuing. "However, you also made some critical errors that would have had serious consequences in real combat." Sarah pointed back toward the rope bridge. "When you decided to send the wounded through the water, did anyone test the water depth first? Did anyone check for underwater obstacles? Did anyone have a backup plan if the injured couldn't swim?" The recruits exchanged uncomfortable glances. In their rush to solve the immediate problem, they had overlooked basic safety protocols. "In special operations, creative solutions are essential," Sarah continued. "But they must be based on thorough assessment and risk management. Creativity without discipline gets people killed." Master Chief Rodriguez appeared with lunch rations and water. 30-minute break, then we moved to communications training. As the recruits settled into eating and rehydrating, small groups formed naturally. Johnson found himself sitting with Martinez and Stevens, the three of them discussing the morning's lessons. "I keep thinking about what the LT said about assumptions," Martinez said between bites of his MRE. "I assumed being designated wounded was just an artificial handicap. But people do get wounded in real operations, and the team still has to complete the mission." Stevens nodded. "And I assumed that because I'm good at climbing, I should just focus on getting myself over the wall as fast as possible. But the team needed me to help others, not just excel individually." Johnson was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Yesterday I thought this course was about proving I was good enough for special operations. Today I'm starting to realize it's about learning whether I can be trusted with other people's lives." The afternoon communications training was unlike anything the recruits had experienced. Instead of learning radio protocols and signal procedures, Sarah had them practicing non-verbal communication in high-stress situations. "In special operations, you often can't rely on electronic communications," she explained as she set up a complex scenario involving hostage rescue in an urban environment. "Radio silence, equipment failure, enemy jamming, civilian presence. There are countless reasons why you might need to coordinate complex actions without speaking a word." The exercise involved 2 teams of 11 recruits each, with one team playing hostage takers and the other attempting rescue. The twist was that the rescue team could not speak, use radios, or make any sound above a whisper once the exercise began. Johnson found himself designated as team leader for the rescue operation, a responsibility he approached very differently than he would have 2 days earlier. Instead of developing a plan and giving orders, he spent time soliciting input from every team member and building consensus around their approach. "Stevens, you have experience with building entry. What's your assessment of the structure?" Johnson asked quietly during the planning phase. 2 primary entry points plus possible roof access," Stevens replied. "But with no verbal communication allowed, coordination is going to be critical." Thompson studied the mock building where the hostages were being held. "We need clear signals for everything. Stack formation, breach timing, target identification, threat assessment." The team spent their planning time developing a comprehensive set of hand signals and positioning cues. Johnson realized that this level of detailed coordination required much more trust and understanding between team members than he had ever experienced. When the exercise began, the silence was both eerie and revealing. Every movement had to be deliberate and clear. Hesitation or confusion from any team member could compromise the entire mission. Johnson led his team through a careful approach to the target building, using available cover and maintaining visual contact with all team members. The hand signals they had developed worked well for basic movement, but the complexity of the scenario soon revealed gaps in their planning. Inside the building, the hostage-takers had set up a realistic scenario with multiple rooms, civilian dummies, and various obstacles. The rescue team had to clear each room systematically while maintaining absolute silence. That's when Johnson made a critical error. As they approached what appeared to be the main hostage location, Johnson spotted what looked like a clear shot at one of the hostage-takers. Without waiting for his team to be in position, he signaled for immediate action. The result was chaos. Two team members moved simultaneously from different directions, creating a crossfire situation. Another team member, not having received the signal clearly, held position and failed to cover a critical angle. The hostage-takers played by the opposing team capitalized on the confusion immediately. "Exercise terminated," Sarah called out. Multiple civilian casualties, friendly fire incident, mission failure. The silence that followed was heavy with disappointment and frustration. Sarah gathered both teams for an immediate debrief. What happened? Johnson stood up immediately. I rushed the final approach. I saw an opportunity and took it without ensuring my team was ready. Why? Sarah asked simply. Johnson thought for a moment before answering. I was thinking like an individual operator instead of a team leader. I saw a target and reacted instead of setting up the team for success. That's correct. And what was the result? Stevens answered this time. The hostages died because we weren't coordinated, and we almost shot each other because our positioning was wrong. Sarah nodded gravely. In real special operations, that kind of error doesn't just mean mission failure. It means dead teammates and dead innocents. It means families destroyed and lives lost forever. She let that weight settle over the group before continuing. Team leadership in high-stress situations requires a completely different mindset than individual performance. Johnson, your instinct to take action when you saw an opportunity shows good tactical awareness. But your failure to coordinate with your team shows a lack of leadership discipline. Johnson accepted the criticism without defensiveness. How do I develop better leadership discipline, ma'am? By practicing exactly these kinds of scenarios over and over until coordination becomes instinctive, Sarah replied. And by learning to value mission success over personal recognition. The rest of the afternoon was spent running variations of the exercise, with different people taking leadership roles, and the team gradually improving their coordination and communication. As the day wound down, Sarah gathered the entire group for a final debrief. Today was your first real taste of what special operations demands, she began. You experienced the challenge of team coordination under pressure, the complexity of leadership in high-stakes situations, and the consequences of poor communication. She paused to make eye contact with several recruits before continuing. Some of you exceeded my expectations. Others revealed areas where significant improvement is needed, but all of you demonstrated the willingness to learn from mistakes and adapt your approach based on experience. Johnson felt a mixture of pride and humility at her words. He had failed spectacularly during the communications exercise, but he had also learned more about leadership in one afternoon than in years of previous training. Tomorrow we begin weapons training, but not the kind you're expecting, Sarah continued. You're going to learn to use every tool at your disposal as a weapon, and more importantly, when not to use weapons at all. As the recruits headed back to their barracks, Johnson found himself walking alongside Martinez and Thompson. The three had naturally formed a friendship based on shared learning experiences and mutual respect. You know what's weird? Martinez said as they walked. Yesterday I thought this was going to be about proving how tough we are. Today I feel like we're just getting started understanding what tough really means. Thompson nodded agreement. The LT makes it look effortless, but every exercise today showed me how much I don't know about working as part of a team. Johnson was quiet for a moment before responding. I keep thinking about what she said about being trusted with other people's lives. That's a completely different kind of responsibility than anything I've dealt with before. That evening, as Johnson lay in his bunk reviewing the day's lessons, he realized that his entire conception of military excellence was evolving. Physical strength and individual skill were still important, but they were just the foundation for something much more complex and demanding. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities to learn, and new ways to discover the difference between being a good soldier and being ready for special operations. And for the first time since arriving at the course, Johnson felt like he was beginning to understand what that difference really meant. The third day of training began differently than the recruits expected. Instead of assembling at the firing range or weapons depot, they found themselves in a classroom setting with Lieutenant Commander Chen standing in front of a whiteboard covered in diagrams, photographs, and tactical scenarios. Today you're going to learn about weapons, Sarah began. But first, I want you to forget everything you think you know about armed combat in special operations. She gestured toward a table at the front of the room that held an unusual collection of items. A coffee mug, a rolled magazine, a ballpoint pen, a laptop computer, a set of car keys, and a cell phone. Raise your hand if you see a weapon on this table, she instructed. Several recruits raised their hands tentatively, unsure if this was a trick question. Johnson. Man, I see several potential improvised weapons. The pen could be used for stabbing, the keys for slashing, the laptop is a blunt instrument. Sarah nodded. Good start. Anyone else? Recruit Stevens added. The magazine could be rolled tight and used as a striking weapon. The coffee mug could be broken to create sharp edges. Excellent. Thompson? Ma'am, the cell phone could be a weapon if it's used to call in an airstrike or coordinate an attack. Sarah smiled for the first time that morning. Outstanding. You're beginning to think beyond the obvious. She walked around the table, picking up each item in turn. In special operations, everything is a potential weapon, and every weapon is potentially useless, depending on the situation. Today you're going to learn when to fight, when not to fight, and how to win without firing a shot. Master Chief Rodriguez entered the classroom carrying a large case filled with various firearms, from pistols to assault rifles to specialized sniper weapons. The recruit's attention immediately shifted to the impressive arsenal. These are tools, Sarah said, noting their focus. Very effective tools for specific situations. But they are not solutions to every problem, and using them often creates as many complications as it solves. She picked up a standard M4 carbine and held it comfortably, checking the chamber and safety with practiced ease. This weapon can accurately engage targets at several hundred meters. It can penetrate most body armor and building materials. It can suppress enemy movement and provide covering fire for team maneuvers. Setting the rifle back down, she continued. It can also alert every enemy within miles to your exact position. It can cause collateral damage that turns local populations against you. It can escalate situations that might have been resolved peacefully. And it's completely useless if you run out of ammunition. Johnson found himself taking notes, a habit he had developed since his first day's lesson about assumptions. Ma'am, how do we know when the situation requires weapons and when it doesn't? Excellent question. Let me show you. Sarah moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a scenario. You're part of a 4-person team tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from a hostile urban environment. The asset is located in a building surrounded by civilian residences. Intelligence reports indicate minimal enemy presence, but local police are actively patrolling the area. She turned back to face the recruits. You have multiple options for completing this mission. You could go in with full tactical gear and overwhelming firepower, clearing any resistance with superior weapons and training. You could use stealth and technology to avoid all contact. You could pose as civilians and extract the asset through deception. Or you could use a combination of approaches. Martinez raised his hand. How do we decide which approach is best? By asking the right questions, Sarah replied. What are the mission objectives? What are the acceptable risks? What are the long-term consequences of each approach? What resources are available? What could go wrong? And how do you handle those contingencies? She began writing questions on the whiteboard as she spoke. Is the asset safety the primary concern, or is operational security more important? Are civilian casualties acceptable under any circumstances? Will the use of weapons compromise other operations in the area? Do you need to maintain plausible deniability? How will local authorities respond to different approaches? Thompson was furiously scribbling notes. Ma'am, that's a lot of variables to consider under pressure.
Which is exactly why you practice until this kind of analysis becomes automatic, Sarah replied.
In real special operations, you often have minutes or seconds to make decisions that affect the success of the mission and the safety of everyone involved. She moved back to the weapons table and picked up the ballpoint pen. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that doesn't look like a weapon at all. What followed was a demonstration that none of the recruits would ever forget. Sarah showed them how an ordinary pen could be used to disable an attacker, how a coffee mug could control someone's movement without causing permanent injury, and how a cell phone could gather more intelligence than any weapon could extract through force. But more importantly, she continued, these improvised tools can be used without alerting everyone in the area that violence is occurring. Sometimes the best special operations are the ones where nobody ever realizes they happened. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped forward with a training scenario prepared. Today's exercise will test your ability to choose appropriate tools and tactics for different situations. You'll be working in teams of 4, and each team will face 3 different scenarios, with different objectives and constraints. The recruits were divided into teams, with Johnson finding himself paired with Martinez, Stevens, and Thompson. Their first scenario was presented as a briefing packet with maps, intelligence reports, and specific mission parameters. Scenario 1, Sarah announced. High-value target extraction from a diplomatic event. Target is a foreign intelligence officer willing to defect, but he's surrounded by international diplomats and media. Use of weapons will create an international incident. Extraction must appear completely voluntary and normal. Johnson's team huddled over their briefing materials, immediately beginning to analyze the situation using the framework Sarah had taught them. Okay, let's work through the questions, Johnson said, falling naturally into the leadership role his teammates expected.
Mission objective is clean extraction without revealing the operation.
Primary risk is diplomatic fallout if we're discovered. Resources include civilian clothing, false identities, and communication equipment. Stephen studied the venue layout carefully. The target will be at a cocktail reception with over 200 attendees. Multiple exits, but all monitored by security cameras and diplomatic security personnel. Thompson looked at the target's background information. He's scheduled to give a brief presentation about trade relations. That might be our opportunity. If we can approach him during or immediately after his presentation. Martinez examined the intelligence about venue security, local law enforcement plus diplomatic security from at least 6 different countries. They're not expecting trouble, but they're definitely alert to anything unusual. The team spent 20 minutes developing their plan, focusing on using misdirection and social engineering rather than stealth or force. Their approach involved posing as foreign journalists seeking an interview with the target, using the cover of legitimate media presence to create a natural reason for extended conversation and movement. When they presented their plan to Sarah, she probed their reasoning with specific questions about contingencies and risk management. What if the target doesn't recognize your approach signal? We have a backup journalist who will ask a specific question about trade policy that includes the recognition phrase, Stevens replied. What if diplomatic security becomes suspicious of your credentials? We withdraw immediately and activate the secondary plan, using a medical emergency as cover for evacuation, Thompson answered. What if the target changes his mind about defecting? Johnson answered this one. We respect his decision and extract ourselves without compromising the operation. Forcing an unwilling defector would violate mission parameters and create more problems than it solves. Sarah nodded approvingly. Good analysis. Your plan shows careful consideration of the constraints and objectives. Execute the scenario. The exercise took place in a mock diplomatic facility set up in one of the base's training buildings. Other recruits played the roles of diplomats, security personnel, and media representatives, creating a realistic environment that tested the team's ability to maintain their cover while accomplishing the objective. Johnson's team successfully extracted their target, but not without some tense moments when their journalist credentials were questioned more thoroughly than expected. They adapted on the fly, using their understanding of the situation to improvise solutions that maintained their cover. Scenario 2, Sarah announced after a brief debrief. Terrorist safehouse surveillance. Objective is to gather intelligence about planned attacks without alerting the targets to surveillance. Location is in a densely populated civilian area. Any discovery would endanger local residents. This scenario required completely different skills and approaches. Instead of extraction, they needed to establish covert observation posts, gather photographic evidence, and potentially plant electronic surveillance devices. Martinez took the lead on this scenario, her experience in reconnaissance proving valuable for planning observation positions and surveillance rotations. The team developed a plan that involved posing as utility workers, allowing them to access buildings adjacent to the target location and establish concealed observation posts. The key is patience, Martinez explained during their planning session. We need to gather intelligence slowly and carefully. Rushing the surveillance or taking unnecessary risks could compromise not just the mission, but the safety of everyone in the neighborhood. The scenario tested their ability to remain undetected for extended periods while gathering actionable intelligence. It also forced them to make difficult decisions about acceptable risk levels when unexpected situations arose. During the exercise, a simulated civilian emergency occurred near their observation post, forcing them to choose between maintaining their surveillance position and potentially helping with the emergency. The team made the decision to temporarily break surveillance to ensure civilian safety, a choice that Sarah later commended during the debrief. Scenario 3, Sarah announced, for their final exercise. Active hostage situation. Armed terrorists have taken civilians in a crowded marketplace. Local law enforcement is overwhelmed. Rescue operation must minimize civilian casualties while neutralizing the threat. This scenario finally involved the possibility of using lethal force, but under extremely constrained circumstances. The team had access to the full range of weapons and tactical equipment, but the presence of innocent hostages and the crowded environment severely limited their options. Thompson took the lead on this scenario, his medical training providing valuable perspective on triage and casualty management. The team's approach emphasized careful intelligence gathering, precise positioning, and overwhelming force applied at exactly the right moment to minimize risk to civilians. We need to know exactly where every hostage is located before we move, Thompson insisted during planning. One miscalculation and we could cause the casualties we're trying to prevent. The team spent considerable time developing contingencies for different numbers of terrorists, various hostage locations, and potential complications like booby traps or suicide vests. Their plan involved a combination of distraction, precision shooting, and immediate medical care for any injured civilians. The actual exercise was intense and chaotic, testing every skill they had developed over the previous days. Communication, teamwork, tactical movement, and decision-making under pressure all came together in a complex scenario that felt disturbingly realistic. Johnson found himself in the position of taking a precision shot to neutralize a terrorist threatening hostages. The pressure of knowing that missing could result in civilian casualties was unlike anything he had experienced in training before. The shot was successful, but the aftermath of the exercise left all the recruits sobered by the weight of the decisions they had been required to make. During the final debrief of the day, Sarah gathered all the teams together to discuss their experiences and observations.
Today you experienced the complexity of decision-making in special operations, she began.
Each scenario required different skills, different approaches, and different definitions of success. What did you learn? Johnson spoke first. I learned that the best weapon is often the one you don't use. In the diplomatic scenario, using force would have failed the mission even if it succeeded tactically. Stevens added, patience and intelligence gathering are more important than speed and aggression in most situations. We could have compromised the surveillance scenario by trying to gather information too quickly. Martinez reflected on the hostage scenario. Sometimes you have to use lethal force, but only when every other option has been exhausted and the consequences of inaction are worse than the consequences of action. Thompson nodded agreement. And medical considerations have to be part of tactical planning from the beginning. We can't treat casualty care as an afterthought. Sarah walked them through detailed analysis of each team's performance, highlighting both successes and areas for improvement. She emphasized how the choice of tools and tactics had to be driven by mission objectives rather than personal preferences or comfort levels. The weapons you carry don't define you as a special operations professional, she concluded. Your judgment, discipline, and commitment to mission success define you. The weapons are just tools to implement decisions made by trained, thoughtful, principled operators. As the day ended, Johnson reflected on how dramatically his understanding of military operations had evolved in just 3 days. The complexity and responsibility of special operations work was far beyond anything he had previously imagined. That evening, as the recruits gathered for evening chow, the conversations were markedly different from the first day. Instead of bragging about personal achievements or discussing physical challenges, they found themselves analyzing scenarios, discussing ethical implications, and grappling with the weight of the decisions they might face in real operations. You know what's interesting, Martinez said as their group settled into dinner. 3 days ago, I thought special operations was about being tougher and more skilled than regular military. Now I realize it's about being responsible for decisions that regular military never has to face. Stevens nodded thoughtfully. And the physical skills we all brought here are just the minimum entry requirements. The real training is learning to think and make decisions under pressure. Johnson pushed his food around his plate, still processing the day's lessons. The hostage scenario really got to me. Having to make a split-second decision that could kill innocent people if I got it wrong. That's not something you can train for just by practicing marksmanship. Thompson looked around at his teammates. I keep thinking about what the LT said about being trusted with other people's lives. After today, I understand what she meant. It's not just about protecting your teammates, it's about making decisions that affect innocent people who don't even know you exist. As the evening progressed and the recruits prepared for another early morning, Johnson found himself thinking about the complexity of the path he had chosen. Special operations wasn't just about being an elite soldier. It was about being entrusted with some of the most difficult and consequential decisions in military service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to develop the judgment and wisdom that real special operations demanded. And for the first time, Johnson felt like he was beginning to understand not just what he was training for, but why it mattered. The fourth week of training had taken its toll on everyone. What started as 22 confident recruits had been whittled down to 18. 4 had voluntarily withdrawn from the program, each recognizing that their skills and temperament were better suited to other forms of military service. Those who remained were exhausted, pushed beyond their previous limits, but also transformed in ways they were only beginning to understand. Johnson stood at his bunk at 0400, preparing for what Lieutenant Commander Chen had warned them would be their most challenging exercise yet. His body ached from weeks of constant physical and mental stress, but his mind felt sharper and more focused than it ever had. The cocky, assumption-driven soldier who had first challenged his instructor was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from wisdom, discipline, and unshakable teamwork. Final exercise briefing in 20 minutes, Master Chief Rodriguez announced as he walked through the barracks. Full gear, weather protection, and survival equipment. This one's going to test everything you've learned. The remaining recruits assembled in the pre-dawn darkness outside the main training facility. Sarah stood before them with an expression that conveyed both pride in their progress and concern for what lay ahead. For the past 4 weeks, you've learned individual skills, team coordination, tactical decision-making, and the moral complexity of special operations, she began. Today you're going to discover whether you can maintain those standards when everything goes wrong simultaneously. Behind her, several vehicles were loaded with equipment and supplies. The setup looked more extensive and serious than any previous exercise. This exercise is called Murphy's Law, Sarah continued. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Equipment will fail. Intelligence will be inaccurate. Weather will be hostile. Communications will be disrupted. Team members will be injured. And you will still be required to complete your mission successfully while protecting innocent lives. Stevens raised his hand slightly. Ma'am, what exactly is our mission? Sarah gestured toward a large map mounted on a nearby easel. Humanitarian crisis response. A simulated earthquake has struck a remote mountain community. Infrastructure is destroyed, communications are down, and there are reports of injured civilians trapped in collapsed buildings. Local emergency services are overwhelmed. She pointed to various locations on the map as she continued. Your mission is to locate and extract at least 6 injured civilians, establish a medical treatment area, and coordinate with incoming relief supplies. You have 48 hours to complete the operation. Johnson studied the map carefully, noting the difficult terrain, limited access routes, and distance from support. Ma'am, what resources do we have available? Minimal, Sarah replied bluntly. Basic medical supplies, limited communication equipment, survival gear for 72 hours, and whatever you can improvise from available materials. No vehicles after the initial insertion. No external support except for scheduled supply drops that may or may not arrive on time. Martinez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the early morning temperature. Ma'am, you mentioned team members being injured. Is that part of the simulation? Both simulated and potentially real, Sarah answered. The terrain is genuinely hazardous. The weather forecast calls for severe storms. Physical injuries are possible and will be treated as real regardless of whether they're part of the exercise scenario. Thompson looked around at his fellow recruits, seeing a mixture of anticipation and apprehension on every face. How realistic are we talking about, ma'am? Sarah's expression became completely serious. Realistic enough that if you fail to apply everything you've learned about teamwork, decision-making, and leadership, people could die. The civilian casualties are simulated, but your safety and the safety of your teammates is entirely real. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped forward with clipboards containing detailed mission packets. You'll be divided into 3 teams of 6. Each team will be assigned a different sector of the disaster area. Success will be measured not just on individual team performance, but on overall mission coordination between all 3 teams. As the teams were announced, Johnson found himself designated as team leader for Team Alpha, with Martinez, Stevens, Thompson, and 2 other recruits named Park and Wilson. It was a group that had worked well together throughout the course, but leadership under these conditions would test everything he had learned about command responsibility. The insertion took place at dawn, with each team being dropped off at different points around the simulated disaster area. The location was a genuine mountain training facility where the military practiced alpine operations, complete with realistic terrain features and weather conditions that would genuinely challenge their survival skills. Johnson's team found themselves at the bottom of a steep valley with a river running through it, several damaged structures that represented collapsed buildings, and terrain that would require technical climbing skills to navigate effectively. First priority is establishing our operational baseline, Johnson announced, As the team gathered their equipment after the vehicles departed, safety protocols, communication procedures, and area reconnaissance before we start looking for civilians. Stevens unpacked their communication equipment and immediately encountered their first challenge. Team leader, communications are heavily degraded. I'm getting intermittent contact with base station, but nothing from the other teams. Martinez studied the terrain around them with growing concern. The weather's moving in faster than forecast. We've got maybe 2 hours before that storm system hits us with full force. Thompson began organizing their medical supplies, taking inventory of what they had available for treating potentially serious injuries. Medical supplies are adequate for basic trauma care, but if we find civilians with crush injuries or internal bleeding, we're going to need to get creative. Johnson felt the weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Every decision he made would affect not just mission success, but the safety of his team and any civilians they might encounter. Wilson, Park, I need you two to conduct a careful reconnaissance of those damaged structures, he ordered. Check for structural stability before anyone goes inside. We can't help civilians if we become casualties ourselves. The first civilian they located was trapped under a collapsed beam in what had been designated as a school building. The victim was conscious but clearly in pain, with what appeared to be a serious leg injury. This beam is supporting the structure above, Park reported after careful assessment. If we move it wrong, we could bring down more debris on the victim and ourselves. Thompson had crawled into the confined space to assess the civilian's condition. Possible fracture of the left femur, signs of shock, but vitals are stable for now. We need to get him out, but it has to be done carefully. Johnson found himself facing exactly the kind of complex decision that his training had prepared him for. Speed was important for the victim's medical condition, but rushing could cause a structural collapse that would injure or kill everyone involved. Stevens, can you rig a stabilization system for the beam while we extract the victim? Johnson asked. Martinez, help Thompson prepare the victim for movement. We're going to do this slowly and carefully. The extraction took 45 minutes of painstaking work, with the team using improvised tools and careful coordination to safely remove the beam and extract the injured civilian. By the time they had the victim stabilized and ready for evacuation, the storm that Martinez had predicted was beginning to intensify. Team leader, we've got a problem, Stevens reported. Wind is picking up to dangerous levels. Temperature is dropping rapidly, and visibility is decreasing. The extraction route we planned isn't going to be safe in these conditions. As if to emphasize his point, a gust of wind strong enough to knock a person off their feet swept through the valley, carrying stinging rain and debris. Johnson gathered his team in the shelter of one of the more stable structures to reassess their situation. The civilian they had rescued needed immediate medical attention. They had 5 more victims to locate and extract, and weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Options? He asked, looking around at his team members. Martinez studied their map and the deteriorating conditions outside. We can try to continue the search in these conditions and risk becoming casualties ourselves, or we can shelter in place until the storm passes and risk losing civilian lives due to delayed medical care. Thompson checked the condition of their rescued civilian. This victim needs surgery within 6 hours or he's going to lose the leg, possibly worse. We can stabilize him for a while, but not indefinitely. Stevens tried the communication equipment again. Still no contact with other teams or base station. We're on our own for decision-making. The weight of leadership in real crisis conditions was unlike anything Johnson had experienced in simulation. The safety of his team, the life of the civilian they had rescued, and the lives of 5 more victims they hadn't found yet all hung on decisions he had to make with incomplete information and deteriorating conditions. Wilson, how much shelter can we create in this structure? Johnson asked. Wilson examined the building carefully. It's stable enough to protect us from weather, but not large enough for extended operations. If we bring all the victims here, we'll be overcrowded and won't have room for proper medical treatment. Park had been studying the terrain maps during their discussion. There's a ranger station about 2 kilometers from here. It's marked as having emergency medical supplies and communications equipment. But getting there in this weather with injured civilians would be extremely dangerous. Johnson felt the eyes of his team on him, waiting for a decision that could determine whether everyone made it home safely. This was the moment all their training had been building toward. Real leadership, under genuine pressure, with actual consequences. Here's what we're going to do, he announced after carefully considering their options. Thompson, you stay here with our first victim and continue medical care. Stevens, you maintain communication watch and try to re-establish contact with other teams. Martinez, Wilson, Park, we're going to continue the search for the remaining victims, but we're doing it systematically and safely. Stevens looked concerned. Team leader, splitting the team in these conditions violates basic safety protocols. Johnson nodded. Under normal circumstances, yes, but leaving civilians to die while we wait for perfect conditions also violates our mission parameters. We're going to take calculated risks based on our training and preparation. What followed was the most physically and mentally challenging 6 hours any of them had ever experienced. The search team worked methodically through the disaster area, fighting wind, rain, and increasingly difficult terrain to locate the remaining simulated victims. They found a victim trapped in a vehicle that had been crushed by falling rocks, requiring careful cutting and lifting to extract safely. Another was located in a partially collapsed basement, requiring the team to shore up unstable walls while working in standing water from the storm. Each rescue operation tested different skills and required different approaches. Johnson found himself constantly weighing risks against benefits, making decisions that could save lives or endanger his team members. The most difficult decision came when they located 2 victims in a situation where they could only safely rescue one before the structure became too unstable to remain inside. Johnson had to choose which victim had the better chance of survival and focus their efforts accordingly. This isn't a decision anyone should have to make, Martinez said as they worked to extract the victim they had chosen. But it's exactly the kind of decision special operations personnel face in real crises, Johnson replied. That's why this training matters. By late afternoon, the storm had begun to clear, and they had successfully located and extracted 5 of the 6 required victims. But the physical and emotional toll of the exercise was evident on every team member. Stevens finally re-established communication with the other teams and base station. Team Beta successfully extracted all 6 assigned victims, but lost contact with Team Charlie 4 hours ago. Search and rescue is being initiated. Johnson felt his stomach drop. One of the other teams was genuinely missing, not as part of the exercise scenario, but as a real emergency situation. Are we required to participate in the search for Team Charlie? Thompson asked. Johnson didn't hesitate. We're going to volunteer. If one of our fellow teams is in trouble, helping them takes priority over anything else. The search for Team Charlie took them into terrain they hadn't seen before, following communication intercepts and emergency signals to a location where the missing team had become trapped by a genuine rockslide triggered by the storm. The rescue operation that followed tested every skill the recruits had developed throughout their training. Technical climbing, medical treatment, communication coordination, and leadership under extreme pressure all came together in an operation that was entirely real and potentially fatal if they made mistakes. Team Charlie was eventually located and extracted safely, but 2 of their members had suffered genuine injuries that required immediate medical evacuation. The exercise officially ended when helicopters arrived to evacuate the injured recruits. But the lessons learned continued long after. During the debrief that evening, Sarah gathered all the remaining recruits together to discuss what they had experienced. Today you discovered the difference between training exercises and real special operations, she began. When Team Charlie went missing, it stopped being a simulation. Your response to that emergency showed me everything I needed to know about your readiness for actual deployment. Johnson looked around at his teammates, seeing exhaustion, pride, and a new understanding of what they had committed themselves to. Johnson, Sarah addressed him directly, your leadership during the crisis exemplified everything we've been working toward. You made difficult decisions based on incomplete information, accepted responsibility for the consequences, and prioritized mission success while maintaining team safety. She turned to address the entire group. Every one of you demonstrated the qualities that special operations demands. But more importantly, you showed that you understand the responsibility that comes with these capabilities. The exercise had been designed as a final test, but it had become something more, a genuine emergency that revealed who they really were when everything was on the line. As the recruits prepared for their final week of training, Johnson reflected on how completely his understanding of military service had changed. Special operations wasn't about individual heroism or superior physical capabilities. It was about accepting responsibility for decisions that others couldn't or wouldn't make, and being trusted to make those decisions wisely, even when the consequences were life or death. The young soldier who had once pointed a weapon at his instructor in arrogant challenge was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from wisdom, discipline, and the willingness to put others' safety before personal glory. The final week arrived with a mixture of anticipation and solemnity that none of the recruits had expected. 15 remained from the original 22. Each fundamentally changed by 6 weeks of training that had challenged not just their physical capabilities, but their understanding of leadership, responsibility, and what it meant to serve in special operations. Johnson stood at attention in the dress uniform that seemed almost foreign after weeks of tactical gear and training fatigues. The ribbons and decorations he had earned before arriving at the course now felt different, like symbols of a previous life rather than current achievements. The real test of his worth would be determined not by what he had done before, but by what he was prepared to do in the future. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood before the formation one final time, her own dress uniform displaying the Navy Cross and other decorations that represented real battles fought and real lives saved. Looking at her now, Johnson could hardly believe he had once challenged her qualifications based on her appearance. 6 weeks ago, 22 recruits arrived here believing they were ready for special operations, Sarah began. You thought you understood what elite military service required, and you were confident in your abilities to meet those requirements. She paused, making eye contact with each remaining recruit before continuing. You were wrong about almost everything. The silence that followed was complete, but not uncomfortable. Every recruit understood exactly what she meant. You were wrong about what special operations demands. It's not about individual superiority or physical dominance. It's about wisdom, judgment, and the capacity to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure while maintaining absolute commitment to protecting innocent lives. Johnson found himself nodding slightly, remembering his first day's assumption that special operations was simply about being tougher and more skilled than regular military personnel. You are wrong about what leadership means in crisis situations. It's not about commanding others to follow your vision. It's about synthesizing information from your team, making decisions based on collective wisdom, and accepting full responsibility for the consequences, regardless of whether the outcome is success or failure. Sarah began to walk slowly along the formation as she spoke, her words carrying the weight of genuine experience and hard-earned knowledge. Most importantly, you were wrong about what it means to serve your country in special operations. You thought it was about glory, recognition, and joining an elite brotherhood. Instead, you discovered that it's about accepting responsibility for some of the most difficult and morally complex decisions in military service, often without recognition, and sometimes without even acknowledgement that the mission occurred. She returned to her position in front of the formation and faced them directly. But here's what you got right. You were right to believe that you could learn, grow, and become better than you were when you arrived. You were right to trust that dedication, hard work, and willingness to be challenged could transform you into something greater than you previously imagined possible. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped forward with a folder containing the final evaluations and assignments for each recruit. The moment they had all been working toward was finally at hand. Of the 15 recruits who completed this course, Sarah announced, 12 have been selected for advancement to specialized training programs. 3 will be returning to their original units with recommendations for advanced leadership positions. Johnson felt his heart rate increase. 6 weeks of the most challenging training of his life had led to this moment. Stevens, Martinez, Thompson, Park, Wilson, Chen, Rodriguez, Anderson, Murphy, Garcia, Brooks, and Johnson. You have been selected for advancement to Phase 2 training in your respective special operations tracks. Relief flooded through Johnson, but it was tempered by understanding of what this selection really meant. This wasn't an achievement to celebrate. It was acceptance of even greater responsibility and more challenging training ahead. Roberts, Kim, and Washington, Sarah continued, you have demonstrated exceptional leadership potential and will be returning to your units with recommendations for immediate promotion and assignment to advanced command training programs. Johnson could see that the 3 recruits being returned to their original units were disappointed, but Sarah's next words put their assignments in perspective. Let me be clear about something. Everyone who completed this course has exceeded the standards required for special operations selection. The 3 recruits returning to their units are not failures. They are future leaders whose talents will be better utilized in conventional operations, where their skills can benefit larger numbers of personnel. She gestured toward Roberts, who had shown remarkable ability to coordinate large group operations, but struggled with the small team dynamics that characterize special operations work. Roberts, your ability to coordinate complex logistics and manage multiple moving parts simultaneously is exactly what conventional forces need in senior leadership positions. Your talents would be wasted in 6-person special operations teams. The disappointment on Roberts' face began to fade as he realized that his assignment was based on his strengths rather than his weaknesses. Sarah addressed each of the departing recruits individually, explaining how their specific skills and capabilities would be better utilized in conventional operations, and why their contributions to national defense would be just as important as those of special operations personnel. Special operations is not inherently superior to conventional military service, she emphasized. It's simply different, with different requirements and different applications. Every successful special operations mission depends on support from conventional forces, and every conventional operation benefits from the intelligence and capabilities that special operations provides. After the formal announcements were complete, Sarah dismissed the recruits for individual meetings to discuss their future assignments and continued training requirements. When Johnson's turn came, he found himself sitting across from Sarah in her office, surrounded by the photos, certificates, and memorabilia of a career spent in service that few would ever understand or appreciate. "Johnson," she began, "your transformation during this course has been remarkable. You arrived here with impressive physical capabilities and strong tactical instincts, but you were driven by ego and individual achievement. You're leaving here as a leader who understands that true strength comes from wisdom, and that real success is measured by team accomplishment, rather than personal recognition." Johnson nodded, thinking back to his first day's challenge and how fundamentally his perspective had changed. "Your next assignment is SEAL qualification training. It's going to be even more demanding than what you've experienced here, both physically and mentally. The dropout rate is higher, the standards are more stringent, and the pressure is relentless." She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. "But more importantly, you're going to be trained for missions where the margin for error is zero and the consequences of failure affect national security directly. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" Johnson considered the question carefully before answering. 6 weeks ago, he would have answered immediately with confident bravado. Now he understood that such responsibility required honest self-assessment and genuine humility. "Ma'am, I think I'm prepared to begin learning how to handle that responsibility," he replied. "This course taught me how much I don't know and how much more I need to learn. I'm ready to continue that education."
Sarah smiled slightly the first time Johnson had seen genuine warmth in her expression during their entire training relationship.
That's exactly the right answer. The moment you think you're fully prepared for special operations is the moment you should be removed from special operations. The learning never stops, the challenges never become routine, and the responsibility never gets easier to bear. She handed him a folder containing his orders and training schedule. "You're